Hello and a very warm welcome indeed to Quadriga, where this week we are talking about what else? Brexit, the vote by the British people to leave the European Union. Now, last week's referendum has sent shockwaves out across the world, and the UK is in disarray. The country needs a new Prime Minister and could be facing the prospect of an early election. The EU is also reeling. Among the many big questions being asked, will other member countries now follow the British example? So our question here today on Quadriga is after the Brexit shock, what next? And I've got three seasoned observers and analysts here in the studio to discuss that question with me. Let me introduce them to you, beginning with Ulrike Guérot, the director of the European Democracy Lab, who says the Brexit is a wake-up call and we have to start thinking about a very different Europe in parliamentary terms, in democratic terms and in social terms. Also with us today is Andreas Kluth of The Economist magazine. Andreas believes that the EU should first strive for a lenient and gracious deal that keeps Britain close to the continent, and second, reform itself in a hurry. And welcome too to the well-known business journalist Ursula Weidenfeld. Ursula's message is keep calm and carry on. England made a mistake, but now both sides should work hard to avoid this turning into a disaster. Ursula, my first question has to be, how can you possibly expect anybody to keep calm in this situation of huge uncertainty?
Well, I think the issue is to reduce uncertainty now. And that means if you take the referendum as a dictum which couldn't be returned to something like a partnership or EU membership of England within months, you have to deal with the referendum, with the outcome, and have to try to come as fast as possible to negotiations, to deals in terms of economic issues, of trade issues, of security issues, and of migration issues.
That all sounds very sane and sensible, but there are huge worries out there. The UK could unravel, the EU could collapse, the UK could plunge into recession. And we've had President Obama coming out and saying the British vote raises longer-term concerns about global growth. What's the biggest worry?
I think the biggest worry is about growth, about stability of financial markets and about security.
Ulrike Guérot. She is saying, be calm, stay calm, relax, it's all going to be fine, yeah? Are you calm?
I didn't say that all is fine. I just said that try to make it...
I understand, yeah? Stay calm.
No, I think, staying calm, obviously we stay calm, but stay calm to think better and to make a better Europe. And I think this is really the wake-up call, and that's unfortunately what nobody seems to be doing, because yesterday the Council basically said that's a British internal question, so the Brits are now punished as if you could punish a people, which sounds absurd to me. And then there is no space for really creative new reflection, and I think this is really the wake-up call of what is happening, because what we can see first is that the UK is not alone. I mean, we had a similar situation in Austria. We have divided people. Let me say that sentence, you know, the British wanted to play a strong national card against the European Union. What they earn now is basically the implosion of the British nation. So that might be the wake-up call to reconsider the way how we frame and how we think about Europe. And let's be reminded that, you know, the founding fathers of Europe, what did they say Europe is? To overcome the nation state. So what we see is basically that now, with the Scottish question and all that in place, we do need to reconsider the very question is who's the sovereign of Europe and who's the sovereign in the European democracy? And we should answer that question very calm, without a hurry, but with strong reflection and new reflection.
Andreas.
Well, I don't disagree with anything that's been said to you. First of all, I'm going to try to keep calm. I have been panicking for about a week now, so that's enough panic.
Down, yeah.
As far as uncertainty, yes, we'd like to reduce it, but it's all uncertain, and it will be for a while, and we have to keep calm amid that, and that's just life too. I looked up where the phrase "keep calm and carry on" comes from. It comes from a poster, wartime poster. When, as I think the bombs were already falling,
it has never been published. It is just in stock for the worst case.
That's right. The Brits were telling their own people, "Keep calm and carry on," even amid disaster. That's the only time. Now, clearly, there's so much to say. I mean, the fact that Boris Johnson just said that he's not even going to attempt to become prime minister now, to me proves how irresponsible he was throughout, and he symbolizes the entire irresponsible movement, that they didn't even mean it, and I think that they regret what they did, that they all saw that they created a tone and a media disinformation campaign that they now regret, and I'm hoping that calmness prevails eventually. And in the House of Commons this week, it already came up. Some members of Parliament said we are still a parliamentary democracy, not a direct democracy, and for this reason, the founding fathers of America decided. James Madison, Alexander Hamilton said direct democracy is the road to hell. Therefore, you have a representative democracy. And I think the way to legitimate an exit from Brexit would be to call an election. All the parties in Britain would have to sort themselves out because they're in chaos. That's part of the uncertainty. But have a general election and make that the issue, and then have the parliament that represents the people make the decision. At the moment, I think two-thirds of the parliament doesn't want to exit.
That wouldn't reduce uncertainty. That would just bring more uncertainty for the upcoming months. I think you have to admit that there has been a referendum, there has been a decision, and what Europe has to do now is to get along with that decision and not to think about, well, can there be a way out, and what would be the way out? What would voters think and decide if a government would just call for elections and afterwards not accept the referendum? So the main thing is now to accept that for the upcoming month and to deal with it.
Well, just one second. When you talk about acceptance, I just want to come back because you're from the Economist magazine, yes. Andreas, and the Economist wrote something which I thought was very interesting. They called the outcome of the British referendum a senseless and self-inflicted blow. I thought it was a very interesting use of language, and it seems to suggest that the British people, when we're talking about acceptance, were almost duped, and the question then is duped yes. by whom?
Well, I think I alluded to it. I think they weren't served well by the media and by weak and even bad and irresponsible leaders. And this is, I want to stay on Brexit, but I've written in the past when I was in California about how direct democracy has almost destroyed that state. Mm-hmm. In ancient history, it destroyed Athens and led it into a war that they then degraded. Direct democracy, James Madison and Alexander Hamilton had a lot of quotes about mobs cannot be trusted because when the emotions prevail and you force complex issues that no one understood and still understands, that's the answer to a binary question.
When the elite behaves as it did, it can't be believed in too. So you have to decide whom to believe in.
And I agree with you there because I see this and Trumpism and other things, but I see Brexit as ultimately a revolt against perceived elitism, and this would further that narrative, and that is a cost, and I understand that. But I'm saying you're choosing between bad options now, and I'm still hoping it's my least bad option would be to exit from Brexit. And if we can't, then I'll accept it with you. And I'm ready right here now to talk about what then. I'm ready to accept it. But there is still, I think, a glimmer of hope.
Ulrike, you've been very patient.
I think that Andreas is right, because basically the mob killed Socrates. Let's just say this. And that's not, it's for reason that basically in all democracies we have a two-third majority for really strategic decision. And that is a constitutional decision, which normally in all democracies has a two-third majority, not a very slim majority given on a Sunday, rainy thing where half of the youth who's now complaining about the result didn't register in the first place, and so on and so forth. So, so there is reason to put into place this option of perhaps having a new campaign and change mandate, because obviously general elections would change mandate if the British people now or the parties come up with a strong leader who would say exit from Brexit in a way. But let's go deeper into what is at stake here. And I think this also points to the fact that if we want to have a wake-up call and to learn lessons from what happened, because in the way we do not want to ignore people, I do not want to ignore people, I just want a functioning system, then in a way we need to respect that some of the points that Nigel Farage said when his campaigning was, I am not in control in the European Union. Nigel Farage, sorry, is in essence right. The European Union has a democracy in which you have no, parliamentary right of initiative. You do not control decisions by the people. It's not a government by the people and for the people, which is the flaw of the European Union. And I would argue that even The Economist, now that we are tackling the media, trashed the European Constitution in a prominent issue in 2003. So the media were always basically criticizing the European Union, and now do the so-called populist, because the system, as so the European system, is not taking that very critique for serious, that we need to reform the European or the Europe in a parliamentarian way.
OK, before we come back to all that, and we will pick up that thread again, I'd just like to rewind just a little bit and go back to the actual election in the UK itself. Young British voters were the focus of much attention before the vote, and they voted to remain in the EU by large margin. The turnout was low, however. Let's just listen to what they've been saying about the outcome of the referendum beginning in London.
We're in an international city, and I'm really proud of that, and that might not be the case in 10 years.
A law degree or a legal qualification, an accountancy qualification, those are things which are recognised throughout the EU. And say I wanted to go and practice in Frankfurt or Paris, those qualifications may no longer be recognised.
I'm not happy about the decision to leave the EU. I don't think it's done my generation any good. I think we're going to have to live with these consequences for the rest of our lives.
I work for a startup, so getting investment as a British startup now, I presume, will probably be quite difficult.
Yeah, I'd just like to say to the older generation, I think it's really unfair what you've done to the younger people. We feel really let down by the older generation. We've grown up as Europeans and we're very used to having this freedom, and now it's been taken away from us by people who won't have to live with the consequences as much as we have to.
Andreas, you're nodding, and young people there saying they feel let down. Moving. They feel let down. Yeah,
that was very moving. Nobody could say it better, more eloquently than the lady at the.
What they're talking about is the sense of exclusion that is at the heart of, I think, the European problem at the moment. Part of the reason why the EU lost this vote, effectively.
It's not only this. I mean, now there's a rush on Irish passports, I mean, you wanted to defend a nation, you run for an Irish passport. It adds to sort of the future concept of what a nation is. If something is exploded today, then the British nation, because there's old against young, as we saw, but there's rural against urban, city of London against Scotland, and vice versa. So it brings me back to that point of sovereignty. If we want to reorganize Europe based on what these youngsters there said, we need a functioning European democracy to take people serious when they say we need a say in the system, and then you care for Europe. So, and I think this is one of the lessons learned, that she said it in the in your little movie, which is we are beyond nation anyway. We are grown-up European. So we now need to organize how we live together in a system which is no longer shaped by national states, meaning a European Council in the European system.
Well, I think if they would have been up to the time they had been gone voting, and the reality is that the British youth thought that is a game, and they didn't sign up for the referendum.
Don't you think there are privileged British youth, there are winners, and there are the British kids, the youngsters who have been left behind by developments? Is that not what we're talking about?
If you would ask all over Europe, young people, how do they see Europe? How do they stand for European values? How do they think about the European Union? You would have a divided situation. The well-educated young people who go to universities, who are part of the Erasmus programs, they would all be in favor for Europe and say, well, that is our reality and that is our identity. But if you look at the less educated young people, if you look at people in rural areas without perspectives, who have high unemployment rates, they didn't even recognize that they are Europeans.
That is right, but this can only happen because basically what we do see in the youth data is the same split between losers and winners of globalization. So if you happen to be a young person in the countryside, you have a high chance to be a loser of globalization, and then you believe in a national story because the story tells you that you would win in a national story. It's still fiction that the national story would help you, but it's sad that we do not educate these people better.
But if you call for a referendum, you have to respect the whole population.
I respect this. I'm just claiming that, I mean, first we have the data. I mean, we have data that, for instance, North England, the workers of North England in these industrialized regions, yeah, what is happening is that they will be losing in relative terms much more from not being in the single market than the City of London. The City of London, in a way, will survive. They can go offshore, they can go, you know, like Singapore, whatever, but the North English workers will not survive. And despite that fact, they voted UKIP because they were told the lesson that in a national story they would win. And that's, you know, the populists have sort of the slogans, they don't have the answers. And that has much to do with losers of globalization, which are simply not educated enough to understand the complexity. And therefore you have these results. But it's pitiful. I agree with you that we would better have a youth which is standing up for their future.
The populists might not have the answers, but they have the momentum. More and more people across Europe are turning to anti-EU parties. What should be the response from Brussels?
Well, this is possibly the time, because so far we've been talking about the British Isles. But what should the EU do? And I think we all agree, and everyone says, the EU must reform itself. What does that mean, however? And my worry is that you have at least two camps who are diametrically opposed in what they think that means. Because there's a group, even in German politics, is among the Social Democrats, as opposed to Chancellor Angela Merkel's party. They're aligning themselves, I think, with the federalists in France and Brussels and saying, well, then now the remaining club must get even closer together, deepening, it's called sometimes, integration.
The mantra of ever closer unity,
exactly.
Ever closer integration.
In other words, now the Brits are gone, therefore let's...
But so many ordinary people around Europe do not buy into that. They do not accept that. They reject it.
Exactly, and I think that would exacerbate the trend that you just asked me about, which is that would drive even more Euroscepticism in these countries, including France, where anti-European feeling is very high.
But then you answer with the very old Latin sentence, tertium datur, the third needs to be set. The problem of the current discussion is that we only offer more integration of the same or exit. And the real task is how to think Europe differently. And so to answer the question of the sovereignty, of a different kind of parliamentarism, and to go beyond the shaping of the discussion with nation states, because this is at the origin of the Brexit disaster, at the origin of the Dutch disaster. I mean, let's move out a little bit. It's not only the Brits who have a problem with the EU, because the EU is flawed. And so we had the same sort of referenda thing with the Dutch a couple of weeks ago when they had to vote over an EU-Ukrainian accession agreement, which is completely absurd. Because why should only Dutch people vote over a European accession agreement with Ukraine? So we do need to tackle... So we need to move out of that national framing in the discussions we want to do on a European level. And that comes to the very fact that nations are not sovereign. We need to understand this. People are sovereign. And so you organize a new European democracy around the sovereignty of people and not around nation states.
But that will not happen. Because if
we never say it, it will not happen.
If we walk your way along, you will need a referendum in France to do that, because we should then reframe the treaties. We should come to new agreements. For new agreements, you need a referendum in Ireland, you need one in France, you need probably one in the Netherlands.
I just need one referendum in all European countries of all citizens together.
You can't have a referendum on that in Germany because that is not in the Constitution. So if you respect, if you respect that there in the European reality, there will be no step to go further on. You have to live with the situation we are in.
Look, you know,
and even if you say that Europe always only makes progress in crisis, that may be true, but at the moment we are stuck in a situation. We can't.
No, we are not stuck. We are experiencing constitutional meltdown. That is actually happening in front of our eyes in the UK because you know the Scots wants to enter and so on and so forth. This is basically constitutional meltdown. And the real question is, we are not stuck in a system. Systems are never stuck. This is why this sort of
there
alternative...
will be no Big Bang answer.
We do not know this. We do not know what will happen. Nobody knows, yeah? The only thing we know is that we are now in a cataclysm where the next could be France and the next could be the Czechs and so on and so forth. And the time will come that we need to rethink the system because the system may not survive. That's the only thing I'm saying.
Let me cut in there. We need to take a break from the conversation and... the word cataclysm, yeah. We are in a very, very difficult and troubled passage in the history of the European Union, in the history of the United Kingdom. Some people, though, think that the Brexit decision is an opportunity. Let's get an angle on that first.
Politics in Europe have grown interesting. A positive aspect of the debate that led up to the Brexit was that although the topic was divisive, it also demanded commitment. Leavers and Remainers fought passionately for what they thought was right. The referendum helped revitalize democratic culture in Europe and has reawakened enthusiasm for the EU among many of its citizens. Are anti-EU parties stronger now or weaker? Eurosceptics like Marine Le Pen from France's National Front are buoyant after the Brexit, but it could undermine populist movements in the long run. Britain has been plunged into political and economic chaos, and that could scare voters away from parties that want similar referendums. The EU is pulling together. Britain has always had a unique position in the EU. Successive governments didn't want the euro, but did demand special privileges. With Britain out of the picture, it will be easier to reach consensus in the Union. Could the Brexit actually strengthen the EU in the long run?
What do you say, Ursula? Could the Brexit strengthen the EU?
I don't believe so, because there is England is leaving. It is a European power is leaving.
Scotland is joining.
Scotland is joining, and with its problems. So the economic power of England, everything is a loss for Europe. So Europe will not be winning at all. But what maybe happen is that new thinking and rethinking Europe could include the question, why do we need, or why do we think to need that close union in terms of political integration, in terms of not only economic integration, but social integration. And if you ask yourself, why did we think so? That was always the case because it couldn't be managed otherwise. So it was always the problem, how could you manage trade, economic, social things without just going closer together.
Okay.
And nowadays, we do have a lot of opportunities because the management capacities did enlarge a lot.
Okay.
What I worry about, also in our debate, is that one side of people who want to save the EU is going off into yet another debate about the structures, the institutions. And I think...
where should they be going?
They should not be going there. I think Wolfgang Schäuble believes that, and I'm with him on this point. I think because it was always abstract. People never understood it. People actually had the people in North England, where you come from, that voted for Brexit, never bothered to understand what the Council, as opposed to the Commission and the institution with the Court and the Eurogroup. No. I think what Schäuble seems to think is do less and do it better. Mm-hmm. Pick 2 or 3 things where the EU can cooperate and make a clear and visible, immediate effect in people's lives, and don't get bogged down in the weeds of this other crap, frankly. And those things must be things, and they mention the right ones. Security, we're afraid of terrorism, let's cooperate there. Let's cooperate on closing or controlling the borders around. That is a big part of this anxiety. And possibly in some new push to create growth, so some people who are out of jobs in the southern countries don't go off to the wrong side there. They create fewer losers from globalization. So 3 simple things, and don't worry about the curvature of cucumbers and all the stuff that they made fun of.
Yeah, but here I strongly disagree, because the thing is that the European Union failed because it was not about politics. And now we have a transnational market, we have a transnational currency, at least on the continent. We need to embed that transnational market and transnational currency in a transnational democracy. It's a sheer simple thing. It's about basics, and it's basically what the founding fathers of Europe were claiming since the 1940s, which is we need to have a transnational democracy. And this has much to do with who's the sovereign. The sovereign are not the nation states. The sovereign is not the European Council, which is basically playing national cards all over the place. And if you say that people don't care and they don't understand, I agree, but they do not understand the Council and the Parliament and so on and so forth, because the system is not clear. So if you want good politics, then we need a good engine room. We need to fix the engine room, and that's the task of the day.
What is the structure you're proposing? What is transnational?
What are you proposing? All this, cooperation talk hasn't worked for 25 years. We tried to do cooperation on terror. We never did. We do not really have a good engine room, and therefore the political outcome is never good.
The music is running. Let's just bring in Ursula for the final word. Where would you like the EU to be in a year's time?
I would like it to be more pragmatic and more down to tours, and not just trying a new national state even larger than the ones we have.
I'm not saying this.
OK, we're going to have to leave it there, though. Thank you very, very much for a wonderful discussion. I hope we've given you at home plenty of food for thought on the question of what next after the Brexit shock. Thanks very much for joining us here on Quadriga. Do get in touch with us via social media or by mail. We'd love to hear from you. And do come back next week. Until then, bye-bye.